This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. It is the moment when the masks you have worn for years begin to crack, when the weight of expectation begins to fall away, and when the silent voice you had buried beneath duty, fear, and the constant search for approval finally rises with the force of an ancient tide. To choose yourself is not an act of arrogance, nor a rebellion against the world, but the sacred recognition that you have been entrusted with a soul, and that soul was never meant to be enslaved by the shadows of others' demands. The world will always whisper to you of who you should be, how you should act, what paths you should take, and which dreams you should dismiss. But the day you finally stop listening to those whispers and turn inward is the day you step into a realm where your own light begins to guide you. When you finally choose yourself, you awaken to the truth that your life was never meant to be a continuous sacrifice at the altar of other people's comfort. For so long, you may have believed that love meant pleasing everyone, that belonging meant bending yourself into shapes that silenced your true nature, that acceptance meant betraying your deepest needs in order to maintain peace. Yet peace built on self-betrayal is not peace at all. It is a quiet war that devours you from within, a conflict that no one else can see yet leaves you exhausted, hollow, and endlessly searching for something that feels real. The world tells you to be kind, but kindness without boundaries is servitude. The world tells you to be strong, but strength without authenticity is merely performance. To choose yourself is to realize that your worth does not come from your usefulness to others, but from the living truth of your being. The transformation begins quietly. At first, there is fear, for choosing yourself means disappointing others. It means stepping outside the patterns of approval you once depended upon. There is a death in it, the death of who you thought you had to be. But with every ending comes a rebirth, and this rebirth is the reclaiming of your essence. You will feel guilt at first, as though by honoring your own needs you have done something selfish. You will question whether it is right to put your soul above the demands of those around you. And yet, in that very questioning, you begin to see how deeply conditioned you have been to abandon yourself. The path to freedom always begins with guilt, for guilt is the shadow of your awakening, the ghost that appears as you step out of the prison of compliance. And as you keep walking, the guilt fades, and what replaces it is a strange and beautiful strength that feels like coming home to yourself. When you finally choose yourself, relationships change. Those who only loved you for your silence, your obedience, or your constant giving will fall away, for they were never truly loving you, but only the reflection of what you could provide. You may grieve this loss, for the human heart longs for connection, but in that loss you will discover something greater. Relationships built on truth, on mutual respect, on the deep recognition of another soul rather than the exploitation of a role. The ones who remain, and the ones who enter your life, will meet you not as a shadow of yourself, but as the full being you are. You will no longer attract those who seek to drain you, because you will no longer vibrate with the frequency of self-abandonment. Instead, you will draw toward you those who are nourished by your authenticity, who do not fear your boundaries, who celebrate your voice, and who remind you that love is not slavery but freedom in union. When you finally choose yourself, your inner world shifts. The voice of your intuition, once muffled beneath layers of doubt and suppression, begins to speak with clarity. You find yourself guided not by fear of rejection, but by the pull of purpose. You stop living reactively, constantly adjusting to the tides of others' desires, and begin to live proactively, led by an inner compass that never betrays you. This compass is the wisdom that has always been within you, the part of you that knows what brings you alive, what drains you, what is sacred, and what is poisonous. It is the voice that was silenced when you were taught to conform, to behave, to fit neatly into the expectations of family, culture, and society. But when you choose yourself, you finally free this voice, and in its freedom, you hear the call of your destiny. The path of choosing yourself is not easy, for it requires confrontation with your shadows. Those parts of you that you have rejected, denied, or hidden will rise to the surface, demanding to be integrated. At first, you may resist them, fearing the darkness they represent. Yet to choose yourself is to embrace even the parts of you that the world told you were unworthy. The anger, the sorrow, the desires you once pushed away. All of these are not enemies, but fragments of your wholeness waiting to be reclaimed. When you accept them, you become complete. You are no longer divided against yourself, no longer a battlefield of contradictions, but a unified being whose light is strong precisely because it includes the darkness. To choose yourself is to step into wholeness, and wholeness is power. And what happens when you live from this power? The external world begins to mirror your inner state. Opportunities arise not because you chase them desperately, but because your alignment attracts them. Success begins to feel different. It is no longer about proving your worth but expressing it. You stop asking, "Am I enough?" and instead live as though your enoughness is unquestionable. The world responds to this certainty. Where once doors were closed, now they open, for you no longer seek permission to enter. Where once you begged for recognition, now your presence commands it, not through arrogance but through authenticity. You radiate a quiet confidence that others can feel, a magnetism that does not demand attention but naturally draws it. You are no longer surviving life, you are creating it. Choosing yourself also transforms the way you face challenges. Pain no longer feels like punishment but as initiation. Struggle no longer seems like misfortune but as an invitation to grow deeper into your truth. You no longer see yourself as a victim of life, but as a participant in its unfolding. Every hardship becomes a teacher, every loss a doorway, every wound a portal into greater strength. The storms that once threatened to destroy you now serve to cleanse you, stripping away illusions and false attachments. And in the center of every storm, you discover that you are unshakable, for you no longer stand on borrowed ground, but on the foundation of your own being. To choose yourself is to reclaim your time. You begin to notice how much of your life was once spent on things that drained your spirit. Obligations that were never yours, commitments that suffocated you, roles that had nothing to do with your soul's journey. You no longer move out of compulsion but out of choice. You no longer give your hours to things that do not nourish you. Time, which once slipped through your fingers in endless business, becomes sacred. You treat your days as the priceless treasures they are. You realize that to say yes to yourself sometimes means saying no to others, and in doing so, you discover the liberating truth your life is your own. But perhaps the most profound change of all is the relationship you form with your own soul. For so long you may have seen yourself through the eyes of others, measuring your worth by their approval, adjusting your expression to fit their expectations. When you choose yourself, you begin to see yourself with your own eyes. You begin to witness the beauty, the depth, the uniqueness that no one else could ever fully see. You begin to love yourself not as an idea, not as an image to be perfected, but as a living mystery, unfolding moment by moment. And in that love, you no longer crave validation. You are no longer hungry for affirmation. You no longer fear being alone. For you discover that solitude is not emptiness but communion with the deepest part of who you are. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. You become the author of your own story, the sculptor of your own soul, the guardian of your own destiny. You awaken from the dream of pleasing others and step into the reality of pleasing truth itself. You realize that the world you once feared to disappoint is far less important than the self you must never betray. And in that realization, life becomes luminous. Not because it is without pain, but because even pain becomes meaningful when it serves the growth of your authentic self. The chains fall, the masks dissolve, and you stand revealed. Not as the person others wanted you to be, but as the being you were always meant to become. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. When you turn away from the endless noise of outside approval, and begin to hear the faint whisper of your own truth calling from within, a whisper that was always there but drowned by the expectations of others and the fear of standing alone. And in that moment of turning inward, you begin to feel something awaken that feels like the birth of your real life. For choosing yourself is not a rejection of others, but a sacred affirmation that you too are worthy of devotion, worthy of your own loyalty, worthy of the same love and care you so easily pour into everyone else. And as this realization takes root, the weight you have carried for years begins to lift. The weight of saying yes when you meant no, the weight of pretending to be fine when you were breaking inside, the weight of holding up worlds that were never yours to carry. And when that weight falls, you stand taller, freer, and more grounded in the essence of who you truly are. And though at first there is fear, because the identity you built through compliance begins to crumble, though there is guilt, because the old voices of conditioning scream that you are selfish for daring to prioritize yourself, though there is doubt because you have lived so long by the eyes of others that you question whether your own gaze can truly guide you. Beyond this fear, beyond this guilt, beyond this doubt, There is a radiant strength waiting, a clarity that floods in like sunlight through a broken window, and you begin to see that the world you once tried so desperately to please is not your master, but your mirror, reflecting back to you the state of your own soul. And the more you live in betrayal of yourself, the more you attract betrayal from others, the more you silence your voice, the more you meet people who refuse to hear you, the more you diminish your worth, the more you draw to you those who take and take without giving. But when you choose yourself, this mirror shifts, and suddenly you are no longer magnetized to those who prey upon your self-abandonment, but instead begin to attract those who respect your boundaries, who are not afraid of your voice, who do not shrink from your truth but stand taller because of it, and relationships that once drained you begin to fall away, not by force but by the natural law that authenticity repels falsehood. And though there is grief in watching familiar faces fade, there is also wonder in discovering new connections built not on need but on mutual recognition, not on exploitation but on resonance. And you come to understand that losing those who cannot love the real you is not a tragedy but a liberation, for it makes space for the ones who can. When you finally choose yourself, your inner world begins to reorder itself. The noise quiets and intuition, once buried, begins to rise like a clear bell, guiding you not through fear but through a sense of inner knowing. And suddenly the path you once thought you had to chase becomes the path that unfolds naturally beneath your feet. Doors open not because you beg or prove yourself, but because your very presence, aligned and whole, carries an authority that no permission from the outside could ever grant, and success itself shifts in meaning. For it is no longer the desperate attempt to earn worth, but the joyful expression of it, and even struggle no longer feels like punishment, but like initiation, as though each hardship is not meant to crush you, but to carve you into the shape of your highest self. And where once you saw yourself as a victim tossed by circumstance, you now see yourself as a participant in the great unfolding of life, recognizing that every storm you have faced was preparing you to stand in this place where you no longer live by fear but by truth. Choosing yourself transforms your relationship with time, for you begin to see how much of your existence was given away to things that starved your spirit, how much of your energy was consumed by obligations that had nothing to do with your soul's calling, and you no longer say yes out of compulsion, but out of choice. You no longer measure your worth by your business but by your aliveness, and suddenly time feels different, no longer a cage but a canvas, no longer slipping away but stretching open as you dedicate your hours to what nourishes you, to what feels real, to what ignites the flame within. And in this reclaiming of time, you discover presence. You discover that the moments you once missed in your constant striving were always the very place where life was waiting to be lived. When you choose yourself, you also meet the parts of you once rejected, the shadow aspects you buried because you were told they were unworthy, the anger, the desire, the grief, the vulnerability. And at first their return frightens you because you were conditioned to believe that darkness makes you unlovable. Yet as you face them, you discover that these parts are not enemies but exiled fragments of your wholeness, each carrying a piece of your power. And as you integrate them, as you welcome them back, you feel yourself becoming solid, undivided, complete, and this wholeness radiates a power that cannot be faked, for it is not born of performance but of authenticity, not of pleasing but of being. And it is from this state of wholeness that true creation flows, true love blossoms, true freedom becomes possible. And then something extraordinary happens. The outer world begins to rearrange itself around this inner transformation. Opportunities arise, connections appear, synchronicities unfold, not because you force them, but because the energy you carry now calls them forth. And where once you chased, now you attract. Where once you begged, now you command. Not through arrogance, but through the quiet gravity of being aligned with yourself. And you realize that life itself bends toward those who have chosen their truth over their fear, that the universe has always conspired with authenticity, waiting for you to claim your own. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. You stop betraying your soul. You stop silencing your voice. You stop abandoning your own needs to fit into molds that were never meant for you. And in that moment of radical self-loyalty, life ceases to be something you survive and becomes something you create. And you discover that the greatest act of love you can give the world is to live fully as yourself. For only when you are whole do you have something real to offer. Only when you honor your own truth can you truly honor the truth of others. And only when you choose yourself can you finally step into the life that was always waiting for you. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else, when you stop bending under the invisible weight of expectation and step into the raw presence of your own being, when you stop contorting your soul to fit into cages that were never meant for you, and finally allow yourself to breathe. And that first breath of freedom is unlike anything you have ever tasted, because it is the breath of truth, the breath of authenticity, the breath that comes when you finally stop betraying yourself in the name of pleasing others. And in that moment a shift begins inside you, a quiet earthquake that dismantles the false layers you have built, the masks you have worn, the voices you have internalized that told you who you should be, how you should act, what you should sacrifice. And as those layers crumble, you stand face to face with the essence of who you really are. An essence that has been waiting patiently in silence for you to remember it. An essence that was never broken, never unworthy, never too much or too little, simply hidden beneath the rubble of years spent trying to be acceptable. And when you finally choose yourself, that essence rises like a flame, burning away everything false until only the real remains. At first it feels terrifying, because for so long you have measured your worth by the approval of others. For so long you have calibrated your choices against the scale of external validation. For so long you have believed that love is something you must earn by shrinking, contorting, sacrificing. And to suddenly say yes to yourself feels like rebellion. It feels like selfishness. It feels like betrayal of all the rules you were taught. But as you sit in the discomfort of this unfamiliar territory, you realize that it is not selfishness, but self-loyalty. Not arrogance, but alignment. Not betrayal, but liberation. And though the voices of guilt and doubt echo loudly at first, they begin to fade as the strength of your own truth grows louder. Until one day you wake and realize that you no longer feel heavy. You no longer feel like a stranger in your own life. You no longer live by the script written by others, but by the song rising from within. And when you finally choose yourself, your relationships begin to change, because those who only loved the version of you that served them, the version that gave endlessly without receiving, the version that silenced her needs for the sake of harmony, those people begin to slip away, and though you grieve their departure, you also recognize the gift in it. For they were never loving the truth of you, only the convenience of you, only the parts of you that made their lives easier. But the ones who remain and the ones who arrive after will be different. They will not fear your boundaries. They will not shrink from your voice. They will not demand that you betray yourself for their comfort. They will stand with you. They will celebrate your wholeness. They will mirror back your light, instead of feeding on your silence. And through them you learn that love is not found in losing yourself, but in being fully yourself. And something else happens too. Your inner world begins to transform. The noise that once clouded your mind quiets, the endless doubting and second guessing softens, and a deeper voice begins to speak. The voice of intuition, the voice of knowing. The voice you ignored for years, because you were taught to trust everything outside of you more than the wisdom within. And this voice becomes your compass, guiding you not with fear but with clarity, not with desperation but with certainty. And you begin to notice that life flows differently when you listen. Doors open without force. Opportunities arrive without chasing. Connections appear without effort, because you are no longer moving against yourself but with yourself. And the universe always responds to alignment, always bends toward truth, always expands in the presence of authenticity. When you finally choose yourself, struggle does not disappear but it transforms. Pain does not vanish but it reveals its meaning. For you see now that every hardship, every loss, every disappointment was not punishment but preparation. Each wound was not evidence of unworthiness, but a portal into deeper strength. And where you once saw yourself as a victim of circumstance, you now see yourself as a participant in your own unfolding. And this shift changes everything, because you are no longer crushed by challenges but shaped by them, no longer consumed by storms but cleansed by them, no longer afraid of endings but open to the rebirths that follow, and you begin to trust life in a way you never did before. Not because it is easy, but because it is honest. And you are strong enough now to walk with honesty, no matter how difficult. Choosing yourself also redefines your relationship with time. You begin to notice how much of your life you gave away to obligations that drained you. How many hours you spent trying to be who you were not. How many days slipped away in the pursuit of approval. And now you no longer spend time out of compulsion, but out of choice. You no longer measure your life in business but in aliveness. You no longer give away your hours to what empties you but devote them to what nourishes you. And suddenly time feels different. No longer something slipping away but something sacred, no longer a chain but a canvas, no longer a burden but a gift. And each moment becomes richer because it is lived in truth, not in performance. And when you finally choose yourself, you meet the parts of you once rejected, the shadowed places you disowned because they did not fit the image others wanted, the anger you suppressed, the grief you buried, the desire you denied, the vulnerability you hid. And though facing them feels overwhelming at first, you come to see that they are not enemies but exiled pieces of your wholeness, each carrying power, each carrying wisdom, each waiting for your acceptance. And as you welcome them home, you become whole, you become undivided, you become rooted in a strength that cannot be faked. A strength that radiates not because you are perfect, but because you are real, and it is from this wholeness that your true power rises. The kind of power that does not dominate but illuminates, does not control but inspires, does not seek but attracts. And the outer world responds to this wholeness. Opportunities begin to align with you. People begin to be drawn to you. Synchronicities appear like signs on the path, not because you are forcing life, but because you are living in harmony with it. And where once you chased, you now attract. Where once you begged, you now embody. Where once you doubted, you now trust. And life itself becomes less of a battle and more of a dance, less of a struggle and more of a creation, less of a prison and more of an endless unfolding. And in this unfolding you realize that choosing yourself was never about rejecting the world, but about finally offering the world something true, something real, something only you could bring, because only you carry the exact essence of who you are. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself above all else. You reclaim your soul. You reclaim your time. You reclaim your voice. You reclaim your life. And in that reclamation everything changes, because you are no longer a shadow of yourself, but the fullness of yourself. No longer a reflection of others' desires, but the embodiment of your own truth. No longer surviving on borrowed ground, but living rooted in the unshakable foundation of who you are. And when you live from that place, you discover that life itself begins to open, not because it suddenly became easier, because you finally became free.